Chapter 2. Cytine Station, Security Area, 9-8-52. Marsh had not yet arrived, not baggage or man. Cherryh settled in with the others, chose his room of the four which opened by sliding partitions onto a central area, the whole thing an affair of movable panels, white on silver tracks. The furniture was on tracks, spare, efficient, not comfortable. It was the fourth such change of lodging they had suffered in the last 10 days, lodging not far removed from the last, not visibly different from the last, no less guarded by the young mannequins, ubiquitous and armed in the corridors. The same for the months they had been at this place before the shifting about started. They did not, in effect, know where they were, whether on some station near the first or orbiting Cytine itself. Questions obtained only evasions. Security, they said on the moves, and patience. Cherryh maintained calm before his companion delegates, the same as he did before the various dignitaries and agencies, both military and civilian, if that had any distinction in Union, which questioned them, interrogations and discussions both singly and in a group. He had stated the reasons and the conditions of their appeal for peace until the inflections of his voice became automatic, until he had memorized the responses of his companions to the same questions, until the performance became just that, performance, an end in itself, something which they might do endlessly, to the limit of the patience of their hosts' interrogators. Had they been negotiating on Earth, they would have long since given up, declared disgust, applied other tactics. That was not an option here. They were vulnerable. They did as they could. His companions had borne themselves well in this distressing circumstance, save Marsh. Marsh grew nervous, restless, tense. And it was of course Marsh the Unionists singled out for particular attention. When they were in single session, Marsh was gone from their midst longest. In the 4 times they had been shifted lately, Marsh was the last to move in. Bella and Diaz had not commented on this. They did not discuss or speculate on anything. Cherryh did not remark on it. Settling in on one of the several chairs in the living area of their suite, and picking up from the inevitable vid set the latest propaganda the Unionists provided for their entertainment, either closed circuit, or if it were station vid, it indicated mentalities incredibly tolerant of boredom. Histories years old, accounts cataloging the alleged atrocities committed by the company and the company fleet. He had seen it all before. They had requested access to the transcripts of their own interviews with the local authorities, but these were denied them. Their own facilities for making such records, even writing materials, had been stolen from their luggage, and their protests were deferred and ignored. These folk had an utter lack of respect for diplomatic conventions. Typical, Cherryh thought, of the situation, of authority upheld by rifle-bearing juveniles with mad eyes and ready recitations of regulations. They most frightened him, the young, the mad-eyed, the 2 same young ones. Fanatic, because they knew only what was poured into their heads. Put in on tape, likely, beyond reason. Don't talk with them, he had warned his companions. Do whatever they ask and make your arguments only to their superiors. He had long since lost the thread of the broadcast. He cast a look up and about, where Diaz sat with her eyes fixed on the screen, where Bella played a game of logic with makeshift pieces. Surreptitiously, Cherryh looked at his watch, which he had tried to sync with the hours of the Unionists, which were not Earth hours, nor Pell's, nor the standard kept by the company. An hour late now. An hour since they had arrived here. He bit at his lips, doggedly turned his mind to the material on the screen, which was no more than anesthetic, and not even effective at that. The slanders they had gotten used to. If this was supposed to annoy them, it did not. There was, eventually, a touch at the door. It opened. Ted Marsh slipped in, carrying his 2 bags. There was a glimpse of 2 young guards in the corridor, armed. The door closed. Marsh walked through with his eyes downcast, but all the bedroom doors would slid closed. "Which?" he asked, compelled to stop and ask of them. "Other side, other way," Erez said. Marsh slung back across the room and set his bags down at that door. His brown hair fell in disorder, thin strands about his ears. His collar was rumpled. He would not look at them. All his movements were small and nervous. "Where have you been?" Erez asked sharply, before he could escape. Marsh darted a look back. "Fouled up in my assignment here. Their computer had me listed somewhere else." The others had looked up, listened. Marsh stared at him and sweated. Challenged the lie. Show distress. The rooms were all monitored. They were sure of it. He could call Marsh a liar and make clear that the game was reaching another level. They could, his instincts shrank from it, take the man into the bathroom and drown the truth out of him as efficiently as Union could question him. Marsh's nerves could hardly stand up to them if they did so. The gain was questionable on all fronts. Perhaps, pity urged at him, Marsh was keeping his ordered silence. Perhaps Marsh wanted to confide in them and obeyed his orders for silence instead, suffering in loyalty. He doubted it. Of course the Unionists had settled on him. Not a weak man, but the weakest of their 4. Marsh glanced aside, carried his bags into his room, slid the door shut. Erez refused even to exchange glances with the others. The monitoring was probably visual as well, and continuous. He faced the screen and watched the vid. Time was what they wanted. Time gained by this means or gained by negotiations. The stress was thus far bearable. They daily argued with Union, a changing parade of officials. Union agreed to their proposals in principle, professed interest, talked and discussed, sent them to this and that committee, quibbled on points of protocol. On protocol, when materials were stolen from their luggage. It was all stalling on both sides, and he wished he knew why on theirs. Military action was surely proceeding, something which might not benefit their side in negotiation. They would get the outcome dropped in their laps at some properly critical phase, would be expected to cede something further. Pell, of course. Pell was the most likely session to ask, and that could not be allowed. The surrender of company officers to Union's revolutionary justice was another likely item. Not feasible, in fact, although some meaningless document could be arranged and compromise. Outlawry, perhaps. He had no intention of signing fleet personnel lives away if he could help it, but a yielding of objection on prosecution of some station officials classed as state enemies? That might have to be. Union would do as it wished anyway, and what happened this far remote would have little political impact on Earth. What the visual media could not carry into living rooms, the general public could not long remain exercised about. Statistically, a majority of the electorate could not or did not read complicated issues. No pictures, no news. No news, no event. No great sympathy on the part of the public, nor sustained interest from the media. Safe politics for the company. Above all, they could not jeopardize the majority they had won on other issues, the half-century of careful maneuvering, the discrediting of isolationist leaders, the sacrifices already made. Others were inevitable. He listened to the idiot vid, searched the propaganda for evidence to clarify the situation, listened to the reports of Union's alleged benefits to its citizens, its vast programs of internal improvement, of other things he would wish to know, the extent of Union territory in directions other than earthward, the number of bases in their possession, what had happened at the fallen stations, whether they were actively developing further territories, or whether the war had effectively engaged their resources to the utmost. These pieces of information were not available, nor was there information to indicate just how extensive the rumored birth labs were, what proportion of the citizenry they produced, or what treatment those individuals received. 1,000 times he cursed the recalcitrance of the fleet, of Signe Mallory in particular. No knowing ultimately whether his course had been the right one, to exclude the fleet from his operation. No knowing what would have happened had the fleet fallen in line. They were now where they must be, even if it was this white set of rooms like all the other white sets of rooms they had experienced. They were doing what they had to. Without the fleet, which could have given them negotiating strength, minor, or proven a frighteningly random third side in the negotiations. The stubbornness of Pell had not helped. Pell, which chose to placate the fleet. With support from the station, they might have had some impact on the mentality of such a Mallory. Which still returned to the question whether a fleet which considered its own interests paramount could be persuaded to anything. Mazian and his like could never be controlled for the length of time it would take Earth to prepare defense. They were not, he reminded himself, not Earthborn. Not regulation followers, to judge by his sight of them. Like the scientific personnel who had reacted to Earth's immigration bans and summons homeward back in the old days, by deserting further beyond. To Union, ultimately. Or to be like the Constantines, who had been tyrants so long in their own little empire that they felt precious little responsibility toward Earth. And this terrified him when he let himself think about it. He had not expected the difference out there, had not expected the Union mentality, which seemed to slant off toward some angle of behavior neither parallel nor quite opposite to their own. Union tried to break them down, this bizarre game with Marsh, which was surely a case of divide and conquer. Therefore, he refused to engage Marsh. Marsh, Bella, and Diaz did not have detailed information in them. They were simply company officers, and what they knew was not that dangerous. He had sent back to Earth the 2 delegates who, like himself, knew too much. Sent them back to say that the fleet could not be managed, and that stations were collapsing. That much was done. He and his companions here played the game they were given, maintained monastic silence at all times, suffered without comment the shifts in lodging and the disarrangements which were made to unbalance them. A tactic merely aimed at weakening them in negotiations, Ares hoped, and not that more dire possibility that it presaged a seizure of their own persons for interrogation. They went through the motions, hoped that they were closer to success on the treaty than they had been. And Marsh moved through their midst, sat in their sessions, regarded them in private with a bruised, disheveled look, without their moral support. Because to ask reasons or offer comfort was to breach the silence which was their defensive wall. Why? Ares had written once on a plastic tabletop by Marsh's arm, in the oil of his fingertip, something he trusted no lens could pick up, and when that had gained no reaction. What? Marsh had erased both, and written nothing, turned his face away, his lips trembling in imminent breakdown. Ares had not repeated the question. Now at length he rose, walked to Marsh's door, slid it open without knocking. Marsh sat on his bed, fully clothed, arms locked around his ribs, staring at the wall, or beyond it. Ares walked over to him, bent down by his ear. Concisely, he said in the faintest of whispers, not even sure that would fail to be heard. What do you think is going on? Have they been questioning you? Answer me. A moment passed. Marsh shook his head slowly. Answer, Ares said.
I singled out for delays,"
Marsh said, a whisper that stammered.
"My assignments are never in order. There's always some mix-up. They keep me sitting and waiting for hours. That's all, sir."
"I believe you," Cherryh said. He was not sure he did, but he offered it all the same and patted Marsh's shoulder. Marsh broke down and cried, tears pouring down a face which struggled to be composed. The supposed cameras. They were eternally conscious of the cameras they believed to be present. Cherryh was shaken by this, the suspicion that they themselves were Marsh's tormentors as much as Union. He left the room and walked back into the other, and swelling with anger, he stopped amid the room, turned his face up to the complicated crystal light fixture which was his chiefest suspicion of monitoring. "I protest," he said sharply, "this deliberate and unwarranted harassment." Then he turned and sat down, watched the vid again. His companions had reacted no more than to look up. The silence resumed. There was no acknowledgement of the incident the next morning, in the arrival of the day's schedule, carried by a gun-wearing mannequin. Meeting 0800, it informed them. The day was starting early. There was no other information, nor topic, nor with whom, nor where, not even mention for arrangements of lunch, which were usually included. Marsh came out of his room, shadow-eyed as if he had not slept. "We don't have much time for breakfast," Cherryh said. It was usually delivered to their quarters at 0730, and it was within a few minutes of that time. The light at the door flashed a second time. It opened from the outside. No breakfast, rather a trio of the mannequin guards. "Cherryh," one said. "Just that, without courtesies. Come." He bit back a reply. There was no arguing with them. He had told his people so. He looked at the others, went back and got his jacket, playing the same game, taking time and deliberately irritating those waiting on him. When he reckoned that he had delayed as long as made the point, he came alone to the door and into the custody of the young guards. Marsh, he could not help thinking. What was their game with Marsh? They brought him down the corridor in the correct direction for the lift, through the lift sequence and halls without marking or designation, into the conference rooms and offices, which relieved his immediate apprehensions. They entered a familiar room and passed through into one of the 3 interview rooms they used. Military this time. The silver-haired man at the small circular table had metal enough studding the pocket flap of his black uniform to have made up the ranks of the last several he had talked to combined. Insane pattern of insignia. No knowing what, precisely, the intricate emblems represented. Amusing on one level, that Union had managed to evolve so complex a system of medals and insignia, as if all that metal were meant to impress. But it was authority and power, and that was not amusing at all. Delegate Cherryh? The gray-haired man, gray with rejuve by the scarcely lined vigor of the face, a drug entirely common out here, available on Earth only in inferior substitutes, rose and offered his hand. Cherryh took it solemnly. Seb Azov, the man introduced himself. From the Directorate. Pleasure to meet you, sir. The central government. The Directorate was, he had learned, now a body of 312. Whether this related to the number of stations and worlds in some proportion, he was not aware. It met not only on Cytine, but elsewhere, and how one got into it, he did not know. This man was, beyond doubt, military. I regret, Cherryh said coldly, to begin our acquaintance with a protest, Citizen Azov. But I refuse to talk until a certain matter is cleared up. Azov lifted bland brows, sat down again. The matter, sir? The harassment to which one of my party is being subjected.
Harassment, sir?
He was, he knew, supposed to lose his composure, give way to nervousness or anger. He refused either. Delegate Marsh and your computer seem to find difficulty locating his room assignments. Remarkable, since we are inevitably lodged together. I rate your technical competency above that. I am unable to name it anything but harassment that this man is kept waiting hours while alleged discrepancies are sorted out. I maintain that this is harassment designed to lessen our efficiency through exhaustion. I complain of other tactics, such as the inability of your staff to provide us recreational opportunity or room for exercise, such as the inevitable insistence of your staff that they lack authorizations, such as the evasive responses of your staff when we make an inquiry regarding the name of this base. We were promised Cytine. How are we to know whether we are speaking to authorized persons or merely to low-level functionaries of no competency or authority to negotiate the serious matters on which we have come? We have traveled a far distance, citizen, to settle a grievous and dangerous situation, and we have received precious little cooperation from the persons we have met here. It was not an improvisation. He had prepared the speech for an occasion of opportunity, and the visible brass presented the target. Clearly, Azov was a little taken aback by the attack. Erez maintained a front of anger, the best miming he had yet done, for he was terrified. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he hoped his color had not changed perceptibly.
It will be attended,
Azov said after a moment. I should prefer, said Erez, stronger assurance. Azov sat staring at him a moment.
Take my word,
he said in a tone that quivered with force.
You will be satisfied. Will you sit, sir? We have some business at hand. Accept my personal apology for the inconvenience to Delegate Marsh. It will be investigated and remedied.
He considered walking out, considered further argument, considered the man in front of him, and took the offered chair. Azov's eyes fixed on him with, he thought, some measure of respect. On your word, sir, Erez said.
I regret the matter. I can say little more at the moment. There's a pressing matter regarding the negotiations. We've come upon what you might call a situation.
He pressed a button on the table console.
Kindly send in Mr. Jacoby.
Erez looked toward the door, slowly, betraying no strong anxiety, although he felt it. The door opened. A man in civilian clothing came in. Civilian, not the uniforms or uniform-like suits which he had distinguished all who had previously dealt with them.
Mr. Segest Erez, Mr. Dayan Jacoby of Pell Station. I understand you've met.
Erez rose, extended his hand to this arrival in cold courtesy, liking it all less and less. A casual meeting, perhaps. Forgive me. I don't remember you.
Counsel, Mr. Erez.
The hand gripped his and withdrew without warmth. Jacoby accepted the gestured offer of the third chair at the round table.
A three-cornered conference,
Azov murmured.
Your terms, Mr. Erez, claim Pell and stations in advance of it as the territory you wish to protect. This doesn't seem to be in accord with the wishes of the citizens of that station, and you are on record as supporting the principle of self-determination.
This man, Erez said without looking at Jacoby, is no one of consequence on Pell, and has no authority to make agreements. I suggest you consult with Mr. Angelo Constantine and send appropriate inquiries to the station council. I don't, in fact, know this person, and as for any claim he makes to be on the council, I can't attest to their validity. Azov smiled.
We have an offer from Pell which we are accepting. This does throw into question the proposals under discussion, since without Pell, you would be laying claim to an island within Union territory, stations which, I must tell you, are already part of Union territory by similar decisions. You have no territory in the beyond. None.
Erez sat still, feeling the blood draining from his extremities.
This is not negotiation in good faith. Your fleet is now without a single base, sir. We have utterly cut them off. We call on you to perform a humanitarian act. You should inform them of the fact and of their alternatives. There's no need for the loss of ships and lives in defense of a territory which no longer exists. Your cooperation will be appreciated, sir. I am outraged,
Erez exclaimed.
That may be, Azov said, but in the interest of saving lives, you may choose to send that message.
Pell has not ceded itself. You're likely to find the real situation different from what you imagine, Citizen Azov. And when you wish better terms from us, when you want that trade which might profit us both, consider what you're throwing away.
Earth is one world.
He said nothing, had nothing to say. He did not want to argue the desirability of Earth.
The matter of Pell, said Azov, is an easy one. Do you know the vulnerability of a station? And when the will of the citizenry supports those outside, a very simple matter. No destruction, that's not our purpose. But the fleet will not operate successfully in the absence of a base, and you hold none. We sign the articles you ask, including the arrangement of Pell as a common meeting point, but in our hands, not yours. No difference, really, save in the observance of the will of the people, which you claim to hold so dear.
It was better than it might have been, but it was designed to appear so. There are, he said, no representatives of the citizens of Pell here, only a self-appointed spokesman. I would like to see his letters of authorization. Azov gathered up a leather-bound folder from before him.
You might be interested in this, sir. The document you offered us, signed by the government and Directorate of Union, and the Council, precisely as you worded it, abstracting the control of stations which are now in our hands, and a few minor words regarding the status of Pell. The words, under company management, have been struck, here and on the trade document. 3 small words. All else is yours, precisely as you gave it. I understand that you are, due to distances, empowered to sign on behalf of your governments and the company.
Refusal was on his lips. He considered it, as he was in the habit of considering what slipped from him. Subject to ratification by my government, the absence of those words would cause distress.
I hope that you will urge them to acceptance, sir, after reflection.
Azov laid the folder on the table and slid it toward him.
Examine it at your leisure. From our side, it is firm. All the provisions you desired, all the provisions, to put it frankly, that you can possibly ask, since your territories do not exist.
I frankly doubt that.
That is your privilege, but doubt doesn't alter fact, sir. I suggest that you content yourself with what you have won. Trade agreements which will profit us all and heal a long breach. Mr. Erez, what more in reason do you think you can ask? That we cede what the citizens of Pell are willing to give us?
Misrepresentation.
Yet you lack any means to investigate, thus confessing your own limitations of control and possession. You say the government which sent you from Earth has undergone profound changes, and that we must deal with you as a new entity. Propose to meet our signing of their document with further demands? I would suggest, sir, that your military strength is at a low ebb, that you have no means to verify anything, that you were obliged to come here in a series of freighters at the whim of merchanters. That a hostile posture is not to the good of your government.
You are making threats.
Stating realities. A government without ships, without control of its own military, and without resources, is not in a position to insist that its document be signed without changes. We have abstracted meaningless clauses and 3 words, leaving the government of Pell essentially in the hands of whatever government the citizens of Pell choose to establish. And is this a fit matter of objection on the part of the interest you represent?
Cherryh sat still a moment. I have to consult with others of my delegation. I don't choose to do so with monitoring in progress.
There is no monitoring.
We believe to the contrary.
Again, you are without means to verify this one way or the other. You must proceed as best you can.
Cherryh took the folder. Don't expect me or my staff at any meetings today. We'll be in conference.
As you will.
Azov rose, extended his hand. Jacoby remained seated and offered no courtesy. I don't promise a signature.
A conference? I quite understand, sir. Pursue your own course. But I should suggest that you seriously consider the effects of refusing this agreement. Presently, we consider our border to be Pell. We're leaving you the Hinderstars, which you may, if you wish, develop to your profit. In case of failure of this agreement, we shall set our own boundaries, and we will be direct neighbors.
His heart was beating very hard. This was nearing ground he did not want to discuss at all.
Further,
said Azov,
should you wish to save the lives of your fleet and recover those ships, we've added to that folder a document of your own, contingent on your agreement to attempt recall of the fleet and your order to them to withdraw to the territories you have taken for your boundary by the signature of this treaty. We will drop all charges against them and against other enemies of the state which you may name. We'll permit them to withdraw under our escort and to accompany you home, although we understand that this is at considerable hazard to our side.
We are not aggressive.
We could better believe that did you not refuse to call off your ships, which are presently attacking our citizens.
I've told you flatly that I have no command over the fleet and no power to recall it.
We believe that you might use considerable influence. We will make facilities available to you for the transmission of a message. The cessation of hostilities will follow the fleet ceasefire.
We'll consider the matter.
Sir?
Cherryh bowed, turned, walked out, met by the ever-present young guards, who began to guide him elsewhere among the offices. The other meeting has been cancelled, he informed them. We go back to my quarters. All my companions do. We have our orders, the foremost said, which was all they ever said. It would be straightened out only when they reached the site of the 0800 meeting and gathered the whole party, a new group of young guards, then to guide them back, long waiting in between while things were cleared through channels. This was always the way of things. Inefficiency meant to drive them mad. His hand sweated on the leather of the folder he was given. The folder with the document signed by the Government of Union. Pell lost. A chance to recover at least the fleet, and a proposal which might destroy it. He much feared that the Government of Union was planning further ahead than Earth imagined. The long view. Union had been born with it. Earth was only now acquiring it. He felt transparent and vulnerable.
We know you're stalling.
He imagined the thoughts behind Azov's broad, powerful face.
We know you want to gain time and why. And for now, it suits us too. A trifling agreement we and you will abrogate at earliest convenience.
Union had swallowed all it meant to digest. For now. They could not afford debate, could not raise deadly issues in a privacy they probably did not have. Sign it and carry it home. What he had in his head was the important matter. They had learned the beyond. It was about them in the person of soldiers with a single face and virtually a single mind, in the defiance of Norway's captain, the arrogance of the Constantines, the merchanters who ignored a war that had been going on all about them for generations. Attitudes Earth had never understood. That different powers rule out here, different logic. Generations which had shaken the dust of Earth from off their feet. Getting home, by signing a meaningless paper Mazian would never heed, no more than Mallory would come to heel for the asking. Getting back alive was the important thing, to make understood what he had seen. For that, he would do the necessary things. Sign a lie, and hope.